Everyone wants to know, who are the top winners and losers coming out of the combine?
Are you a loser or winner?
Who are the most athletic players in this draft class?
The strongest man in the world.
And well, I'm here to tell you, I will be breaking this down from mostly a fantasy perspective. Without further ado, my top winner at the quarterback position. This one's easy. Anthony Richardson, obviously. He's the most athletic quarterback of all time, and that's somehow still an understatement. According to SportsScore, he would also be the second most athletic tight end of all time, between only Vernon Davis and Kyle Pitts. He's also would be one of the top 10 most athletic wide receivers of all time, ahead of Chase Claypool. Everyone remembers how ridiculous his combine performance was. Anthony Richardson's more impressive. I don't think it's insane to say that if Anthony Richardson doesn't work out as a quarterback, you can try to transition him to just about any other position. I think if he told teams he'd be willing to play any position but quarterback, he'd still be a top 50 pick as a tight end, as a wide receiver, sort of like what we saw with Matt Jones. That's just how freakishly athletic he is. Coming into the draft, he was labeled as a high ceiling, low floor prospect. And now they're saying his ceiling looks even high. I think that's true, but you can also argue that this seriously raises his floor. And that's, I think, certainly true from an NFL perspective, but especially true from a fantasy perspective. Here are the top quarterbacks by speed score, which is weight adjusted 40-yard dash time, since the year 2000. Robert Griffin III is number 1, Anthony Richardson is number 2, then Mike Vick 3, Justin Fields 4, and Cam Newton 5. Clearly, this stat seems very predictive of future fantasy points and future rushing attempts, and it is, because having a rushing quarterback in fantasy is a massive cheat code. For a fantasy quarterback in standard leagues, a rushing yard is 2.5 times as valuable as a passing. 100 rushing yards equals 250 passing. A rushing touchdown is 1.5 times as valuable as a passing touchdown. Clearly, having a hypermobile quarterback is a cheat code, and that's who Anthony Richardson is and who he's going to be from an NFL perspective. From a fantasy perspective, Anthony Richardson is your lock QB1. The biggest loser at the quarterback position, I don't know that there is one, because the combine just doesn't really matter for quarterbacks unless you're like an Anthony Richardson. I mean, does anyone else remember what Tom Brady looked like at his combine? Just doesn't really matter for quarterbacks. If I have to pick a biggest loser, I'll say it's probably Will Levis, and maybe it's just because I don't like Will Levis. And just basically, like, Richardson and Levis came into the combine as the two very raw, high risk, high reward, toolsy prospects in the class. And now it's just really hard to argue Levis has a similar ceiling or floor to Anthony Richardson. So just a sort of, Anthony Richardson stole the show, and I think it hurts Levis a little bit. I will give an honorable mention, and that's Bryce Young, who's probably not a winner or a loser, but he is someone I wanted to talk about. The good news with him is he weighed a lot more than anyone expected, 204 pounds. I'm guessing he ate, 6 Chipotle burritos per day and then drank 3 gallons of water prior to weigh-ins, and somehow got up from 185 to 204 pounds. That's still skinny for a quarterback, but for him, that's excellent. Here's the bad news is the combine confirmed he's only 5'10". We basically already knew that, but that's just a big concern. Since 1970, there's only 3 quarterbacks to measure in below 6 foot and throw for at least 3,000 yards in a single season. That's Doug Flutie, 5'10", 180 pounds. Kyler Murray, 5'10", 207 pounds. Russell Wilson, 5'11", 215 pounds. Again, Bryce Young is 5'10", 204 pounds. And so a shorter stature is an issue for quarterbacks because it impairs your vision. You have to see over these towering 6'7" offensive linemen. And so all of this is a concern to me. I used to think height is overrated. I would cape up for Baker Mayfield when he was coming out. But nowadays, no, I don't think height is overrated. I think it's a serious issue. Maybe there's a bet to be made, betting against Bryce Young being drafted 101. I consider that, but these are just my thoughts right now today. But let's move on to the running back position. My biggest running back winner is Bijan Robinson. We all knew Bijan Robinson is special. We all know he's one of the best prospects to come out in a long time. In my opinion, he's above where Saquon Barkley was as a prospect coming out, above Jonathan Taylor, on par with Christian McCaffrey. And he only solidified this status at the combine. He recorded the second best sport score of any running back. He recorded, interestingly enough, the exact same height, weight, and 40-yard dash time as Marshawn Lynch, another great prospect, another hyper-athletic player, unique player. But I think a better comp for him would be LaDainian Tomlinson. As sacrilegious as that sounds, the best fantasy running back ever, that really is kind of who Bijan Robinson reminds me the most of. He's the no-brainer 101 in Dynasty rookie drafts. In redraft leagues right now, he's in play for round 1 at Fantasy Draft Capital, not even knowing where he's going to land. I guess the runner-up would be, after Bijan, would be Deneric Price. He's actually more athletic than Bijan Robinson. He recorded a 96.4 sport score. My production model isn't going to like him. Never had more than 5 rushing touchdowns or 9 receptions in any season at Tulsa. But I actually liked his tape a lot more than I thought I would. And given this athleticism score, I think it's worth taking a chance on him very late in rookie drafts, because Elijah Mitchell and Isaiah Pacheco didn't have good draft capital. Their production scores weren't great, but they did have really strong sports scores. So yes, I consider them very late in the rookie draft because they have that upside given their athleticism. And this player is Deneric Prince is even more athletic than Mitchell and Pacheco. And by the way, I actually liked Prince's tape. I thought he looked good. He ran hard. So maybe there's a little more talent here than my production model is going to give him credit for. My biggest loser at the running back position is De'Von Achane. He's a perfectly average athlete by sports score, recording a score of 50.1. So almost exactly 50th percentile. Now, I know what you're saying. How could this be true when he ran a 4.32 40-yard dash? That's the third best ever 40-yard dash by a running back in combine history. Okay, granted, but his vertical jump sucked, 29th percentile. He skipped all other events, which my model views as an admission of below average athleticism. And because most importantly, he's incredibly small. He's only 5'8.5" and 188 pounds. That's good for a 28.2 BMI, which ranks in the bottom 7th percentile. And that matters way more than his hyper elite 40-yard dash, which, by the way, if you weight adjust that, that's only a 79th percentile speed score. But yeah, the 7th percentile BMI, the small stature, the lightweight, far more significant. 28.2 BMI. If you look back since the year 2000, all running backs with a sub 28 BMI. There's been, let's say, 50 running backs, and there's only ever been 4 who have been useful for fantasy. That's Jamal Charles, Chris Johnson, Darren McFadden, and CJ Spiller. Okay, so definitely some great names on that list. But again, 4 out of 50 is a really low hit rate. And just about every single one of these names, these players drove fantasy players mad. Jamal Charles, Chris Johnson, Darren McFadden, CJ Spiller. Remember when we wanted CJ Spiller to be fed until he puked? And then he quickly puked and was never fed. These guys just never got as many touches as fantasy drafters felt like they deserved. That, and he also dealt with multiple injuries throughout their careers. So sure, Achane is a speed freak like so many of these other names, but I do think the size is going to cap his upside. I do worry NFL teams are going to think his body can't withstand anything more than 150 touches per season. And we know volume drives fantasy production at the running back position. So I do see this capping his upside. I do see this as a concern because in general, low weight, low BMI is a big concern for running backs. Those running backs just tend not to get the volume we want them to get. The biggest wide receiver winner for me is Jackson Smith-Njigba. Okay, maybe I'm cheating a little bit. JSN didn't even record a sports score because he opted out of the 40-yard dash time. He didn't qualify, and also that's like typically I consider a red flag, but I love JSN. And so I'm just gonna call him my biggest winner at the position. And I think he was, because, it was weird. He had one of the most impressive seasons in college history. As an underclassman in 2021, he recorded over 1,600 receiving yards. That was 550 and then 670 more yards than upperclassmen and future top 10 picks Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. No exaggeration, this might have been the most impressive age-adjusted and target competition-adjusted season in college football history. Since then, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave have both said that Jackson Smith-Njigba is better than they are. Brian Hartline is standing on tables basically saying that this is a guaranteed future Hall of Famer. Please draft him in the top 10. And yet somehow he came into the combine ranked outside of the top 3 wide receivers by just about every single draft pundit who you can name. But now, following the combine, everyone seems to remember how good JSN really is. All it took was a 6.57 3-cone and a 3.93 short shuttle time. For perspective, just how good that is, there's been over 1,000 wide receivers to participate in the combine since at least 2000. Both of those numbers rank in the top 15, so top 15 out of over 1,000. A big knock on JSN is that he profiles as a slot-only, or at least slot-predominant wide receiver. That matters from an NFL perspective, but that doesn't really matter from a fantasy perspective. But the good news is these agility drills matter way more for a slot wide receiver than straight line speed. So even if he underwhelms in the 40-yard dash time, it doesn't really matter a ton to me. Keenan Allen, Wes Welker, Anquan Boldin, Cooper Kupp, a ton of slot wide receivers who ran slow 40 times. It doesn't really matter if you're a slot wide receiver. And I think interesting about all of his numbers were almost perfectly identical to that of Julian Edelman, except he's just 3 inches taller. And I think that's a good fantasy comp. I think the second he steps onto the football field, he's immediately going to be a 100 catch guy. And yes, this is my wide receiver 1 in this class. This is definitely my 102 in 1 QB leagues, probably still my 102 in Superflex leagues. My runner-up after JSN is Bryce Ford-Wheaton. Just an all-time combine performance. He recorded the 15th best sports score of any wide receiver since at least 2000. He recorded the 11th best ever speed score. That's weight adjusted 40 time, a very predictive variable. Some names who ranked ahead of him: Calvin Johnson, DK Metcalf, Chase Claypool, Dante Stallworth, Julio Jones, Vincent Jackson, Andre Johnson. Unfortunately, just about every other name on this list was a bust, and I think Bryce Ford-Wheaton is probably the next Miles Boykin or Chris Conley rather than the next Andre Johnson or DK Metcalf. The biggest loser for me at the wide receiver position is going to be Jordan Addison. According to my production model, Addison is the second best wide receiver in this class, right behind only Jackson Smith-Njigba. But now I'm a little nervous because according to SportsScore, He's the third least athletic wide receiver in the class. He had a sports score of just 16.0. That means he's just a bottom 16 percentile athlete. He recorded a bottom 10 percentile speed score, or weight adjusted 40 time, a 30 percentile vertical jump. But worse yet, he's only 173 pounds. That's a bottom 3 percentile weight and a bottom 3 percentile BMI, and only 5'11". 173 pounds is like crazy skinny. There's only been 3 successful wide receivers at that weight: Marquise Brown, Deshaun Jackson, and Devonta Smith. Maybe Travis Benjamin, he was around that weight, but maybe he wasn't quite a hit. But let's say he was. Addison doesn't have the elite 4.3 speed of a Hollywood Brown, a Deshaun Jackson, or a Travis Benjamin. So basically you need him to be a Devonta Smith type outlier. And what Devonta Smith had going for him was he was the only wide receiver in 30 years to win the Heisman. Addison was good. I don't know that he was that levels of good. So this is a concern. And on that point, if Addison wasn't the biggest loser, it has to be Jalin Hyatt. No wide receiver had a lower BMI than Jalin Hyatt, and I don't think any wide receiver stock dropped farther than Jalin Hyatt's. Takeaway here, I don't know. I don't think I'm a Jalin Hyatt guy. I would maybe bet the under on whatever his projected draft capital is. I'm skeptical he's deserving of a round 1 pick, but you never know. I'm still building out my models. That's subject to change. A few other losers. K-Shock UT guy sucked in every event. Everyone's kind of already talked about that. But above him, I would put Josh Downs and Nathaniel Dell. Josh Downs is only 171 pounds. Nathaniel Dell was only 165 pounds. These are all concerns. But the only thing I'll say is that the NFL does seem to be trending towards smaller, skinnier players. Rondale Moore, Wan'Dale Robinson, Greg Dortch, they're all a number of all-time height outliers who did have success last year. Devonta Smith was an all-time BMI outlier who looked like a top 10 wide receiver all of last year. Christian Watson, Jameson Williams, CeeDee Lamb, they all had sub 24.5 BMIs. So if that's the justification you want to make for Josh Downs, Nathaniel Dell, Jalin Hyatt, Jordan Addison, you'd say, okay, they're historically skinny, but the NFL is trending in that direction. That is an argument we make. My biggest winner at the tight end position is Zach Kuntz. He recorded a 98.9 sports score. That ranks 5th best in my entire database going back to the year 2000. Here's the top 8 list. 1, Vernon Davis, 2, Kyle Pitts, 3, Jimmy Graham, 4, Ben Watson, 5, Zach Kuntz, 6, Noah Fant, 7, Jared Cook, 8, Evan Ingram, George Kittle, Greg Olsen, Rob Gronkowski. They weren't too far behind. Athleticism matters a lot at the tight end position, a lot more than it does for running backs, and much, much more than it does for wide receivers. Zach Kuntz was in the top 10 percentile in height, 40-yard dash, speed score, vert jump, broad jump, burst score, 3-cone, weight adjusted 3-cone, short shuttle, just an all-time freak. He's basically a literal Jimmy Graham clone, except Kuntz has better hops, which is maybe a little surprising given Graham's famously well-known basketball background. Did you know Jimmy Graham used to play basketball? Athleticism, again, definitely matters most of the tight end position. Another way to prove this is even if you're still a little raw or inexperienced, you can be successful. Logan Thomas was a quarterback in college. Robert Tonyan was a quarterback in college. Darren Waller was a wide receiver in college. Travis Kelce, another quarterback convert. And so even if you're a little raw at the position, if you have athleticism, it really does tend to go a long way. But I think that argument works against Kuntz. He was already a freak athlete in high school as a hurdler. He spent 3 years at Penn State, only gained 26 yards. Spent 2 years at Old Dominion, didn't really do much, averaged just 28.8 yards per game last year, and now he's 24 years old. So if he's this big freak athlete, how come he was never that productive, especially against lesser competition at Old Dominion? So I'm skeptical he ever does anything at the NFL level. He's probably just the new Rob Hausler or James Hanna. But I mean, he's worth a late round flyer pick in a tight end premium league, 4th round rookie pick, something like that. Still, I'm more skeptical than not, but this is, a great all-time combine performance. After Zach Kuntz, who's the biggest combine winner, it's tough to say. Realistically, there's like 6 biggest winners, or the biggest winner is whoever has the most rookie picks in your tight end premium. Daniel Jeremiah said this was the best tight end class he's seen in 10 years, and it definitely looks that way athletic. To me, that elite athlete is anyone in the top 12 percentile by SportScore. And this year we had 6 qualifying tight ends. Over the prior 5 years, we averaged just like 1.6 per year, and this year we had 6 tight ends who qualified. There was Zach Kuntz, Luke Musgrave, Darnell Washington, Luke Shoemaker, Will Mallory, and Sam Laporta. And that was the order I had it. So yes, I did have Luke Musgrave over Darnell Washington. Washington had an inch of height on him. That doesn't really matter to me. In fact, there's never been a tight end 6'7" or taller to finish as a fantasy tight end 1. They were basically tied in speed score. Musgrave destroyed Washington in the jumps, which are 2 of the most predictive events for tight ends. The one thing Washington had going for him was an elite short shuttle time, an elite weight-adjusted short shuttle time, but that event is just not predictive at all for tight ends, certainly nowhere near as predictive as the jumps. So athletically speaking, he was my tight end 3. I have Luke Musgrave ahead of him. Also, just like from a ranking perspective, I do think Darnell Washington's really overrated. I'm going to have Luke Musgrave well ahead of him in my rankings. Dalton Kincaid well ahead. Michael Mayer well ahead. But yeah, let's talk Mayer, because to me, the biggest loser at the tight end position is easy. That's Michael Mayer. He's only the 10th most athletic tight end in this class. He came in with a SportScore of 65.1, so nearly 66th percentile, upper 2/3. That's above average. The problem is it's just not above average for this class. His 4.70 40-yard dash time wasn't great. Speed score is far and away the most predictive variable for tight ends. It wasn't a great speed score, and it wasn't a good 40-yard dash time. But it's also far from the death knell. A 4.7 40-yard dash time is either tied or better than TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Reed, Dalton Schultz, Zach Ertz, Keith Miller, Jason Witten. Well, not early career Jason Witten, but certainly like post-2010 Jason Witten, when he was running like a 5.5 40-yard dash and still somehow finishing as a fantasy tight end 1. But I digress. I'm calling him a loser because I expect Dalton Kincaid to test significantly better. Kincaid didn't run any events due to injury, but I really think when those pro day numbers come in, it's going to crush Michael Mayer, because in my production model, they're basically tied. So once you factor in the athletic difference, I do expect Dalton Kincaid to improve and create some ground between them. But remember, this is a really special class, so even if Mayer underwhelmed, he still profiles as like a rich man's TJ Hawkinson to me. I think he's who TJ Hawkinson was coming out, a great prospect, but like a little bit better than. So again, these are my thoughts. These are who I think are the biggest winners and losers. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.